Howdy, you delicious people. I'm here today to review the pilot episode of C. So, the goofy thing about this show is it kind of drops you down into this world where you're to try to quickly understand what exactly is going on. So, it seems like it is a world that was kind of forced back into the Dark Ages to like Game of Thrones kind of style of things because we have like a record player in this show that is to tell us like, okay, so there's certain kind of things that people still use from like a modern time kind of thing, but like it also seems that like basically like we don't have guns in here, like we don't have like all we have is just kind of like knives or stuff like that, so we don't quite understand exactly like the time period of here or like how everything was to come to be. It's just a show that it's just like, hey, just plop right in here and try to understand what's going on. So going into this show, it seems that there are things a little bit more than just people going blind. Evidently, or the world who had gone blind. We eventually are to have certain people with specific abilities, like being able to hear the future, or being able to hear a lie, or being able to like hear people from a great distance, or something like that. Some kind of just ability that certain people have with them. So, also going on here, we have this really interesting battle sequence that ends up being put out in the very first episode. But we also have these things called witch finders. Because evidently there is to be a woman that ends up into the tribe of Jason Momoa's, who he ends up playing Baba Voss in this episode. And probably from then on out, I'm sure. But anyway, so this girl who is to be Magra is to eventually go into Jason Momoa's tribe because evidently she is 4 months pregnant. And so Jason Momoa kind of takes her in. But all of a sudden, once he ends up taking her in, it seems that there is a cluster of these witchfinder people trying to find this woman because either she is to have some certain thing that these people need, or her children have something that these people are to need. So I just kind of found this show like a little bit interesting, but also like really just confusing. Also to just be like, okay, like it just seems like we're just introduced to a bunch of people that I'm just like, who are any of these people? But yeah, so we also have this guy who's kind of stuck in the middle of the road of this, where we have this guy called Gather Backs, who's kind of eventually just kind of stuck in the middle of things. We also have at points in time where we find out how they are to understand things. Like, bizarrely, there is this string that is to have certain kind of notches or certain kind of like things on it that are to tell them certain things, like where there's a ladder or some other kind of thing in this episode, which I'm like, okay, that seems like a weird delivery system. I guess they couldn't have figured out Braille or how to do that, or like maybe they ran out of paper, or who knows. But yeah, I guess that was just their easiest like way of doing a system of letters or whatever. But anyways, so going on in this show, I thought it was interesting. But yeah, like this is like the very first episode. It kind of is to show bits and pieces here, but like that's all it really is to be. The long stretch of it is just a battle sequence, which I thought was really cool. I really did enjoy the battle sequence. Because they had to kind of like do a lot of interesting things during the battle sequence, because like people had to kind of be very clever and try to understand where things were throughout this. So it was kind of like the battle sequence is like the most interesting thing, how people have to kind of like figure out how to get to people And I thought that was interesting. So, with that said, I'm going to go out of my way to go into spoilers about this very first pilot episode. If I haven't said already, for people that are probably interested in seeing C, where could they go out of their way to see this movie or this show for the first time? You can probably go into a letter C movies. You can probably go into that and see this show fairly easily. Or you could probably go into an app called Fox HD Movies, where the logo will say so, but not the title. But if you search the word Fox HD Movies, that logo or that app will come up fairly quickly. You should probably be able to see from that app as well. But yeah, so let's get into that double 5 time territory to go into spoilers about the show. Spoiler time. It's about that time we do spoil this episode. A little bit of a frog in my throat. Let's go and give myself a little bit of sip here. All right. Could have paused, could have done a reset, but So, I don't know what it is. So, going into here, let's go into spoilers about this. So, really, we open up this episode with a girl named Mahra, who is to have her twins being born. And so we have this girl who is to be called Paris, that is to help this woman getting delivering of her children. And so both of them, towards the end of this episode, are to get delivered. And supposedly Mahra is to desperately want Baba Voss, who is Jason Momoa's character, to eventually to eventually be there when the childs are first there. She wants Baba Voss to be the first one to be there when these kids are being birthed, but sadly enough, he's too busy. There's either a battle going on between him and these witch finders, or he is just too busy. There's a lot of people that need to speak with him. He's very important. There's a lot going on today for Jason Momoa's character. So while Mara is giving birth, Baba Voss is to seemingly prepare for a battle because it seems that people are making assumptions that certain kind of things are to make their way down here, but they don't know exactly what, because of course they can't see what it is. So eventually there is to be some guy sent who is Gether Bax, who is kind of either a scout or kind of a messenger. And so Gather Bax eventually makes his way over to the Witchfinders to eventually have them kind of torture him and eventually try to squeeze this guy for information. And so Gather Bax eventually tells these guys that eventually Mahra is with Baba Voss and to get that information out of this guy. So and once they find out that information, they're like, man, we're gonna go and try to find them and go and kill them because we want this woman. We desperately want this woman. So I'm trying to anyways. So I'm trying to get the right information. And that is to be a guy named Tamakni Jun. Tamacti Jun. I'm probably going to ill-pronounce some of these names. Give me a leeway to I'm probably just going to call him Jun. So we lead to eventually have Jun making his way with his people to eventually fight out Bubba Voss. Bubba Voss is to evidently have this wall that is to be around his place, and a wall full of rocks. So what ends up happening is both of these two armies are to eventually meet, and like we have Baba Voss, who with his group, or with his tribe group. I don't know the perfect word to say this, and like I hope it doesn't sound like offensive when like I guess group will be good enough. So Baba Voss is to go and have his group kind of do this like tribal, like Samoan kind of uh like getting ready for this battle, kind of like singing and dancing kind of thing, and which I honestly thought was really cool. I thought that was a cool way to just like get these people prepared for battle and get them like freaking in the right mindset, and it was kind of cool. So because eventually the threat is coming near, because of course they can technically hear them very well to see that they're X amount of spots off. So eventually, once these people come to this wall, eventually they're trying to like feel around, and they're trying to eventually go and start like prepping these ladders, these weird looking ladders that are to eventually like get on top of this whole like rock wall. And so eventually we start trickling in some of these characters who like kind of quietly set up these ladders and quietly set up these things. And then eventually we start seeing this onslaught of like these guys with these long strings and these rocks attached to the end of it. Like they start flinging these strings of rocks to like smack all these people. And then we start to see this thing really kicking off with the group of the Witchfinders going and setting up these ladders to eventually get at these people. And at one point, we have one of the Witchfinder group who ends up going and taking this string with a rock attached to it and kind of doing it as a kind of a flinging device to where it goes and like it's kind of like a fishing line kind of, where we have it just attached to Jason Momoa's neck, and he ends up getting dragged to eventually making it like to where he ends up trying to cut off the string. But like there's this moment where like Jason Momoa with his like giant cleaver like weapon, which looks like very much anime style of a weapon. It looks so weird. How it's kind of like this big cleaver, but it then has this long like arm of a thing, which I'm just like, that just looks so like, it's so interesting. It kind of looks like I can only say that it looks very like an anime like weapon. But like you would have thought that the blade would have been a lot longer, but I guess they could like, I guess it's like, good enough. So but eventually we just see this huge onslaught of this battle where of course no one can see anything. And eventually one of Boba Voss's people end up getting like kind of lost within the enemy. And so Bubba Voss goes and tells people that like concerning this fight is just going to continue to happen, and how they're like now having to forcibly like fight these guys so heavily because like they've gotten ladders and stuff like that to get over these walls. Bubba Voss makes the determination that he has to release this wall, like undo these ropes and just release this wall. So that way this wall of rocks will just fall on all these people and kill probably quite a bit of them off. So that way they will run away, and that's basically what they do. So now that this place technically is open for enemies, because eventually since this wall was released, that basically creates an opening for enemies to come on in. And it seems like these Witchfinders are really wanting to come after Bubba Voss's people. And so what eventually ends up happening is eventually Bubba Voss is to try to say, okay, to um, we need to be able to get out of here. We need to go somewhere else because these people are coming for us. And so we have the people of this town who are kind of voting whether or not the Witchfinder people are coming here because like there's something that they want, or maybe it's just some random attack where these characters are just wanting to finally like take these people's land or whatever. And so while that's going on, Boba Voss is to find his wife and to find his children in her arms. So Boba Voss goes back to his people, and they have supposedly already voted that there has to be a real reason why, like, these witchfinders are coming for them, and more than likely, it's probably because of Magra, who has been here since X amount of time. So Bubba Voss is just like, well, hey, like, how about we just go and we just get out of here? We just try and be able to figure out another way to get us um, to a safer place. So we end up having Bubba Voss and his people, because at one point we have Bubba Voss's people that are almost going to attack Bubba Voss himself, but there were certain people of Bubba Voss's like tribe that decided, well, like if you're gonna kill him, like you're gonna have to kill me too. Like there's certain people that just started to line up, and we're going to protect Bubba. So they decide, like, okay, fine. Like if anything, like we're not gonna have an all-out war with ourselves. Like we're just gonna go on and find a new place that hopefully might be safer. So that leads the entire group to decide to go over this bridge because other than that, they would have to try to find some way to get through the waters, and they were just like, no, like that seems very unsafe. So, if anyways, they tried to go through this bridge first, and we have the Witchfinders who end up going and trying to do the exact same strategy, but they end up forcibly having Gether Bax, who's kind of like the information guy. Like they forced him to go through this bridge first to see how sturdy the bridge was. So coincidentally, Bubba Voss is to tell his group that, hey, like if I can make it through this bridge, then anybody can make it through this bridge, because I guess supposedly he's the bigger out of all of them. So what ends up happening is Bubba Voss ends up going through this bridge and eventually ends up kind of almost smacking into Gether Bax, or he kind of like feels like his movement as well as his. So what ends up happening is Gather Bax just starts to, or like continues to try to make momentum, and Bubba Voss just kind of retreats and is to try to cut down the bridge. But Gether Bax is to eventually find out that these people are starting to cut this bridge, so he's desperately to ask for them to stop. And so Boba Voss knows about Bax, so he lets him to get through the rest of the bridge safely, and then he cuts off the bridge so that way none of the Witchfinders will make their way through this bridge. And so they're like, oh crap, where are we going to go now? Well, they eventually go to a spot of the waters where like there is to be this like little stream where eventually there is to be these ladders to go down. So it's much more rock than water. So coincidentally, Bubba Voss is to spot this little tree trunk of a ladder and read this little lined note that ends up saying, or stringed note, let's just say, that ends up saying that it's a ladder. So they end up climbing down this and eventually make their way to a decent spot of land. So I guess that's where they are to decide that this is going to be their new home. And eventually, uh, Bubba Voss ends up going and taking all the ladders and kind of just tossing them off to the side so that way no one will decide to go this route. Or eventually, some people will probably hurt themselves making their way down there. So, we also get to see this woman who is to be called Queen Kane. We really just get to like mostly see her going and getting like clothed for the day, and then eventually she ends up going off to like going into prayer. But while she ends up going into prayer, she ends up like sitting on some chair and like touching herself to the point of her like going getting into ecstasy by the time she ends up kind of finishing up her prayer. All of a sudden, like while this girl is to be listening to like some song called Perfect Day via this record, she is to eventually have like somebody come in and talk to her to where she has to forcibly go and speak to somebody about the power of the light. Because a like a bird or something or a crow or something was sent to her, a messenger was sent to her to find out that they're having problems being able to get this woman and so on and so forth. And so we have Queen Kane who's mentioning to these people about the power of light and how like they're not quite sure if this Magra woman still has it, or maybe it's passed off to her children. And so they're like, well, more than likely, like, probably the most valuable thing is to either, like, probably just have this woman's children instead of her herself. So they're still technically going after, like, the Witchfinders are still going after this woman and probably uh, her children to just kind of see, like, who is to have this power of light ability. But yeah, so eventually we'll see what happens with that. And so, like, really, I think that's all that I could say really actually happens with this within this episode. Kind of a very vague one, in all honesty, just because this is like a weird, goofy episode that for a pilot episode, I'm just kind of like, this doesn't quite easily explain everything. It just like presents things, and then you're just like, okay, what is this? But yeah, so like that's all that I really have for this very first episode. Um, like I wish I could have came in here with much more information, but that's all and truly what I got. So with that said, I think we can get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.